Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome to the second day of the CX Next Summit, virtual edition produced by Martech Vibe. My name is Aziza Razak Berdiva. I'm a keynote speaker, presenter, and fulfillment coach, and I'm here today to host these 2 days. Thank you all for joining us today. It's fantastic to see you all again, industry leaders, in this room, in this virtual room. After a successful day one of the CX Next Summit, we are back and better with amazing sessions and the biggest names in CX from the region and globally. While marketing leaders are leveraging new technological advancements, the CX Next, our virtual customer experience summit, will demonstrate how technology, strategy, consumer insight, culture, and innovation can meet and exceed the ever-evolving customer needs and expectations. We've got an unmatched line of speakers for you, ranging from CX experts, brand custodians, behavioral scientists, and behavioral economists today, so stay tuned. I would like to thank before our distinguished speakers, viewers, and all our partners who have supported Martech Vibe and made this event possible. And a massive shout out and thank you to HCL Unica, our presenting partner, for being at the forefront of the CX narrative in the region. Thank you to our gold sponsors, Zendesk, Telium, and Freshworks. I would strongly urge all of our attendees to visit their booth and have a conversation with them to discover how they're helping clients like you with their CX strategy. I'm sure that will help you fine-tune and ace your CX strategy. And now let's get rolling with our sessions for today. Our first speaker is here to unveil the psychology of effective customer experience, which will equip you, industry experts, with a winning strategy for your brand. Please welcome Patrick Fagan, the renowned behavioral scientist all the way from UK. Patrick has over a decade of experience in applying psychology to influencing behavior in the real world. He's a chief scientific officer at behavioral science consultancy Capuchin and previously worked at Cambridge Analytica. Patrick contributes to media publications such as BBC, The Evening Standard, and a frequent speaker at events such as Talks at Google, Nudge Talk. So over to you without further ado, Patrick.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. Let me just share my screen. Here we go. So hi, welcome everyone to my talk on the psychology of effective CX. In which I'm going to talk about three things. First of all, the kind of background of behavioral science and decision making as it applies to CX, and importantly, how to grab and engage people's limited attention spans, and then applying that to decision making specifically, looking at how to nudge behavior. And then thirdly, importantly, making the point that it's not a one size fits all. So how do you customize this approach for different types of people? I'd like to start with an example study where participants, well, it was a university, a campus that wanted to reduce littering. So they created this sign and they had participants look at it and they had a look at how it affected littering intentions. And the sign says, "Meet Christina," with a picture of Christina there. "She loves to run around the campus, but one day she tripped on a soda can and injured her leg. Now she can't run around anymore, so please recycle." And they changed one thing to reduce littering intentions even further, which was to turn Christina into a squirrel. And that reduced littering intentions by 45% compared to the other one, because squirrels are cuter, more vulnerable, and engage people more emotionally. But the point being, it was just a very small twist, a small nudge that ended up having a large effect. And that's really the crux of behavioral science today, that small things, small nudges can have a big effect. Here's an example from a digital world, from my back catalogue. I worked for a work placements app who hire staff for short-term work shifts, and they wanted to increase their conversion rate for their push notifications, i.e. the proportion of people applying for shifts. And first of all, any push notification is better than none, as you can see. But if you layer in nudges into the push notification, it makes them even more effective, with the social proof nudge being the most effective. So saying there are thousands of other people applying for shifts, so you should too. That was the most effective thing in this case. So why does this happen? Well, it's because we're all known as cognitive misers. That means we have very limited brain power for paying attention to the world and processing information and making choices. It's very hard, if not impossible, to put a number on something like this, but I've seen estimates range from as high as 30% to as low as 0.0004% of our sensory processing being conscious. So the vast majority, or at least the majority of what our brain does, we're not consciously aware of it. And importantly, this is true even though we have very sophisticated technology today. So we all have a device in our pockets that can access all of the information known to man. And what do we use it for? We use it for looking at cat videos and getting into arguments with strangers on Twitter. So even though we have this amazing technology, our motivations and uses are still very much biased and emotional. Evolutionary psychologists say modern skulls house Stone Age brains. And in fact, not only are we still emotional and irrational, but maybe even more so. So there is some research suggesting that technology produces more shallow thinking. So we think less deeply and more superficially. For example, people who use their smartphone search function more score lower on cognitive reflection, meaning they kind of outsource their thinking to what's called the brain in the pocket. So the point being that even though we all use technology to engage with our customers and build customer experiences, let's not assume that this is making people
Patrick, sorry,
irrational.
could you please, the slide that froze, if you could just keep on scrolling, because our audience is not able to see the following slides that you're talking about.
How about this?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Go on.
Okay. Okay. So one of the implications of this is that we are lazy, is one way to put it. So if something is too much work, too much effort, then we tend not to do it, because we are cognitive misers who are hardwired to conserve our energy as much as possible. One example, one case study of this is what's known as the $300 million button, where it was an e-commerce site, possibly PayPal or eBay or something like that. And they increased sales by $300 million in 1 year simply by removing the need to sign up or sign in, because it reduced friction and it made account of the fact that we are cognitive misers with limited brain power. Now, one of the other implications is that we can only pay attention to so much in the world around us. Remember, only 0.0004% of our sensory processing we're consciously aware of. So that means the vast majority of what's out there in the world we tend not to notice. One study found that if you have people walk through a park that has a unicycling clown, only about half of people will notice the unicycling clown. So we can't pay attention to everything. However, there are certain things that will immediately grab our attention. So if you imagine if you're at a very noisy cocktail party and there's lots of people talking and there's music playing and so on, you will, and then you hear someone say your name, you will immediately hear that and pay attention to that conversation, even though you weren't listening to that person. So your brain is processing everything at a very low level. And then what is known as the brain's bouncer decides what you should focus your limited conscious attention on, such as hearing your own name. Fortunately, for designing customer experiences that are emotionally engaging, the brain's bouncer has a VIP list of things that it will instantly pay attention to. So if you hear your own name, you'll instantly pay attention to that. So that's partly why personalization works so well, because we'll instantly pay attention to it. But there are other things as well besides your own name. So normally at this point, I do an experiment, but it doesn't seem like that's going to work.
Patrick, Just sorry, one more moment. If you could just have your presentation in a slide view, so the full screen for better
Yeah,
view for the audience.
but it's not
Just the slide
showing.
view.
Yeah, so I'm in slide view now, but maybe I'll try sharing a different tab. Let's see.
Because our viewers, they're loving your presentation. They really want to see it in full glory.
Yeah. How's this? Is this working?
Perfect.
Great. Good thing I'm not supposed to be a technology expert, huh? So I can do this experiment. Okay, so there are certain things that we will instantly pay attention to. So I want to show you some images on screen very quickly and just see which ones you notice or remember. Okay, here we go. And so I'm going to show three images and just say to yourself which ones you noticed and which you didn't. Did you see a boat? Maybe, possibly not. Did you see a spider? And here is where everyone usually, or most people say yes, they did. And then a house, very rarely people say they saw that. Sometimes they say they did, even though it wasn't up there, which is an interesting point in itself. But the main point being that most people see the spider because it's on the brain's VIP list. It's one of those things we will immediately pay attention to because there's an evolutionary value in doing so. So this is really a whistle-stop tour of how and why to grab people's limited attention spans. There's really two parts to it. The first is we're bombarded with noise and information and choice constantly. So you need to cut through the noise and grab people's limited attention spans. And you can do that in four ways. There's personalization, so people's names or things they recognize, pop culture, celebrities, just things that are already at the front of people's minds will grab their attention. There's emotion. This can be puppies and kittens and babies. It can be emotional words. It could be drama, dramatic scenes, emotional faces, and so on. There's surprising things. There's two types of surprise. One is kind of just physiological. So just loud noise, movement. People will pay more attention to moving images than static images, for example. So animations are always good. The second type of surprise is more banana in nature, like modern art. So these are things that don't really make sense. So just now I said banana doesn't make sense. So it is probably picked up. So it's putting things that are kind of bizarre, unexpected, or new. People will pay attention to that. And then the final thing that grabs attention is primal. These are what I call the three Fs: food, faces, and sex. These grab our attention for evolutionary reasons, of course. In terms of faces, if there's a face in a scene, people will look at that more than 80% of the time. They'll look at that first. And this is partly why emojis work so well. Then once you have the people's attention, you need to keep it sustained. And you can do that through curiosity, like gamification, puzzles, etc. Fluency, which is making things simple and short and visual. And narrative, which is, of course, stories. For example, from my back catalog, I helped a sports betting app improve their App Store landing page conversion. You can see the optimized version below. And here we're using more emojis, so more emotional. The language is more emotional and simple and easier to read, the text. The app screenshots are easier to read. There's less cluttered information and rational information. And this had an uplift in conversion, at least for the kind of fair weather bettors. So the second thing that results from us being cognitive misers is we can't process all of the information in the world. For example, we can only really have about 150 friends. Our brains are not big enough for more than that. And yet we have many more than that, of course, on LinkedIn, for example. So how do we deal with all this information? Well, if you imagine you're in a foreign city on a business trip, and you're looking for somewhere to eat, and you can only find these two, where would you rather eat? Well, most people say the one on the left, and they say it immediately because they know if it's busy, it must be good. So that's a very quick, automatic, intuitive choice you can make. And it is an example of a heuristic, which is a learned or innate rule of thumb, a shortcut that lets us navigate all of the complexity of the world on autopilot without having to think. For example, popular equals good. As I'm sure most of you are aware, there are many, many heuristics. Cialdini's influence is a great place to start with 6 main ones. I'll just give you an example. The NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, sent this text to everyone to encourage them to get their vaccine. And in just 19 words, they've managed to pack in 6 of these nudges. So they said, you have reached the top of the queue and are a priority for getting a free NHS COVID-19 vaccine. So by saying there's a queue, they're using the nudge social proof to make it seem popular. By saying you're at the top, they're using ego because you're above everyone else. By reach, they're using commitment by implying you've already invested time and you've been waiting. Priority makes it seem scarce, so people will value it more. Giving it for free uses reciprocity, so you feel indebted and you'll do what they ask. And then saying it comes from the NHS uses authority or liking. In other words, it comes from a trusted messenger, so you accept the message more. So these are the kind of nudges you can use in your customer experience to nudge a certain behavior you might want, like conversion. Now, importantly, as I alluded to, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So some nudges work better for some people than others. For example, this was a large-scale study with 50,000 people in South Africa where they sent letters out advertising loans. And one of the many things they found was that a picture of an attractive, smiling woman increased sales, but only among men. So the nudge worked, but only for a particular target group. And that's what I'm going to talk about next, is how to personalize the customer experience for different types of people. Now, a key principle underlying this is what's known as thin slices. If I was to give you a very thin slice of cake, you could tell very accurately what the rest of the cake looks like without having to see it. And in the same way, if you see a thin slice of someone's behavior, say their bedroom or their wardrobe or their Facebook profile, you can tell quite accurately what they'll be like the rest of the time, because underlying dispositions predict consistent behaviors across different types of contexts. They predict what movies you'll like, what politicians you'll vote for, and what customer experiences you'll respond to best. For example, here's 2 bedrooms. What type of person do you think lives in each one? Usually most people agree the one on the left, the person is probably more disorganized, maybe more down to earth and more outgoing and extroverted, whereas the one on the right is probably a bit more sensitive, a bit more organized and a bit more introverted. And people have come to a consensus on that rather quickly. So you can tell a lot about someone from a very thin slice like their bedroom. And you can do this digitally as well, which is a key thing. So you can detect different types of people from their digital footprint. For example, looking at the apps they use, I found that people who use Audible are also more likely to use Deliveroo and Etsy. And that's probably an indication of them being open to new things and philosophical and creative. People who use LinkedIn also use Evernote and the Sunday Times, and that's probably organized, hardworking people, and so on. And these can be rather accurate. So in this study, they built an algorithm to predict personality based on Facebook likes, and they found on average it was more accurate at predicting your personality than a family member, a friend, someone you live with, or someone you work with. The only person who knows you better is your spouse, unless the algorithm has 300 or more of your Facebook likes, and then it knows you better than even your spouse does. And they can potentially get quite intimate as well. So with a proof of concept study I did, I found that quite innocuous media preferences like movies and music could predict quite intimate personal things about someone, such as whether or not they watch hentai, which is an explicit form of manga. So this is kind of a funny, memorable example, but the fact being that quite innocuous, unrelated things might be able to predict quite personal psychological attributes. And so the ultimate takeaway from this is that if you target your customer experience to different types of people and their personalities, which you can get through their digital footprint, you can make your customer experience more effective. So if we take Facebook adverts as an example from this study, they found that those targeted to people's personalities were up to 50%, had up to 50% higher conversion rates. So for example, extroverts seeing an advert with someone at a social scene saying dance like no one's watching is more effective for them, for the extroverts, whereas for introverts it's more effective to see an ad saying beauty doesn't have to shout. So what can you personalize in your customer experience to different people? Well, for example, nudges. So going back to the restaurant, social proof is more likely to work for agreeable people because they are more cooperative and non-confrontational. So if you know your audience is agreeable, then a social proof nudge in your customer experience will work better for them. Or aesthetics, where, for example, people who are open to experience like it to be reflective, maybe a bit more sad in tone, have more blues. Conscientious people like it to be predictable, like portraits and landscapes. Disagreeable people like morbid, edgy art. Extroverts like it to be stimulating, and neurotics like it to be gloomy. But again, if you know someone's personality, you can customize the CX to suit them best. And there are many, many things that you can customize here, from nudges to wording, to imagery, to the interests that you target, to the brand personality, and even emojis. And finally, there are 3 broadcom segments you might want to think about, what I call the rebel, the lover, and the thinker. But if you can situate your target audience into one of these 3, that gives you a simple template as to how to customize. And this is finally a case study for me, just saying that it does indeed work. We managed to reduce cost per acquisition by up to about $30 through personalized messaging.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Patrick, for this amazing session. We all learned that for the businesses to thrive in this highly competitive, customer-centric digital age, it's just essential to learn how psychology is applied. Thank you.